Thanks for joining us this week on a very special episode of Four Brothers Farm. This week we sat down with Joel Salatin, a farmer who has inspired so much of what we do on our own homestead. On top of being a farmer, Joel's also a public speaker and an author of so many great books. He's known for challenging the food system and showing that farming can work with nature. We're really excited to dig into his wisdom. Hope you enjoy it. For viewers who might not be familiar with you or what you do, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so our family operates Polyface Farm in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. It's a mixed livestock operation. So we're in animals primarily more than plants, and we direct market everything. We're chemical free. We came in 1961. My dad and mom bought the original hub property in 1961. I was just 4 years old, and it was the most worn out gullied rock pile in the region, very, very cheap. And so we've spent a lifetime trying to redeem it, and it's turned from being a gullied rock pile to arguably one of the most verdant places in the area. And we have beef, pork, chicken, turkey, rabbit, lamb, and duck.
Wow.
And we direct market. We ship nationwide as well. We have a farm store, and we do events. We do a formal apprenticeship and stewardship program for young people. And so one of our most enjoyable things at this point is launching young farmers. And of course, I speak around the world on these local food, clean food, food freedom issues. So yeah, here we are.
Wow, awesome. And some of the processes and systems that you use on your farm are quite a bit different from what you see in big agriculture. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So, yeah. So we have not used an ounce of chemical fertilizer since we came in 1961. And so, in general, what we're looking at is how does nature how does nature operate? What are the patterns of nature? And in other words, nature doesn't depend on you know uh, um, ammonium nitrate from Russia, from Vladimir Putin to keep crops going. So how does nature function? And really, it's quite simple. It's actually elegantly simple. And so, a couple principles. One is animals. Animals are everywhere, and so the idea that animals are bad for the ecosystem, i.e., cows are destroying the it's not the animal; it's the management of the animal. So let's take an herbivore. What's the reason for an herbivore? Well, an herbivore is to prune perennial plants to reestablish their rapid juvenile growth period, just like a viticulturalist would prune vineyards or an orchardist would prune apple trees. In fact, you'd say if they didn't prune, you'd say they were negligent. But when cows come along and prune the forages, we say they're going to destroy the planet. And so when you look at how the herbivore functions in nature, it is as a pruner of biomass to restart the fat, to freshen it up, to prune it. And so they operate under three primary principles. They're moving, they're mobbed up for predator protection, and they're mowing, moving, mobbing, mowing. If you take away any of those three elements, moving, mobbing, or mowing, then you take what is should be a natural asset and turn it into a liability. And 95% of all the livestock in the world do not adhere to moving, mobbing, mowing. They are over mowing, overgrazing. They are not moving. They're in the same field all the time. They're not mobbed up. They're all spread out in a large acreage. And so the truth is that many situations violate all three of those. A feedlot certainly violates them. A Tyson chicken house certainly violates the moving, mobbing, mowing. They're not moving. They're stationary in a single spot. And so and other things as well.
Yeah.
Breathing in fecal particulate all day and that sort of thing. So animals move. Well, as soon as animals move, well, now we have to have mobile infrastructure. We have to have water, we have to have shelter, we have to have control. We have to be able to, place them in a certain place because Starbucks doesn't want our cows running through their parking lot. So, then that creates the design for functional landscape design. And so that's a big deal. So we've built a lot of ponds. We've put money in lanes, access lanes, electric fencing to control everything, and a lot of mobile infrastructure. So we have egg mobiles and gobbledygos and shade mobiles and millennium feather nets. I mean, all these things have names, but they're all mobile, and the mobility fundamentally changes the capitalization of the farm because now the actual infrastructure is independent of the land ownership. If you have mobile infrastructure, you can now place it anywhere, a place that you own or don't own or rent or squat or whatever it is. You can it fundamentally changes. So the big elephant in the room in American agriculture right now is that the average farmer is now 60 years old. The average livestock farmer is 65 years old. So the problem is that when the hurdles, the impediments to entry for young people are so high that young people can't get in, then old people can't get out. The old ones want to get out, the young people want to get in, but the price of land becomes an impediment for exit and entry. But if you have a mobile farm, a mobile infrastructure, then it can be placed on land that's unowned, and that separates the capitalization of land ownership from the farming venture itself, which is obviously a game changer and allows then a young person to be able to jump in and the old person to be able to exit. Another big element is that how does soil build? Well, soil doesn't build with 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer. It builds with decomposition. So the ultimate power source is that big sun in the sky. That sun is sending down energy that is intercepted by photosynthesis through the chlorophyll in green leaves and is converted. I mean, the ultimate solar panel is leaves, grass, trees, all bushes, and that takes that solar energy, turns it into biomass, which then either goes through the digestion of an animal, the digestion of a microbe, the digestion of a fungus, mold, whatever. But eventually, that the decomposition of that biomass is what ultimately builds soil. So it's a carbon economy. It's a carbon economy. So instead of buying chemical fertilizer, we do large scale composting. And so in the winter, for example, when we feed hay to the cows, we have them under an awning, and and we use a carbonaceous diaper. So our fertilizer budget is a commercial chipper, and that chipper then we take to the woods, and we can upgrade the woods by thinning and taking out diseased and crooked and junk trees, and that becomes a carbon base for our carbonaceous diaper in the barn in the wintertime to absorb all the manure and urine from the cows. And then we add corn to it. The corn ferments in that bedding pack. Cows come out in the spring to graze. We put in pigs. Pigs seek the fermented corn in the bedding pack and aerate it and turn it from anaerobic to aerobic compost. That becomes our fertility engine. So that mimics this natural carbon decomposition cycle. And finally, I'll just say that if you look at natural patterns, um, what you see is decentralization, not centralization. And so we scale not by consolidation and centralization, but we scale by duplication. So even though for example, our pastured chickens are in 10 foot by 12 foot by 2 foot high little floorless field shelters, um, we have 160 of them. So we've got the same capacity as a Tyson chicken house, but we were able to we were able to develop them slowly over time with cash flow, debt free, and if we don't like if we want to change them and say, well, let's put them in this field instead of that field, we put them on a lowboy trailer and move them to another field or another farm, another property, and we're right up in business. And so the mobility is a big deal. And then we market everything direct to to patrons rather than going through supermarkets and things like that. We market directly to people, so there's a connection. There's a bit of vetting and connection and whatever mutual responsibility between buyer and seller. It's not just a nameless, faceless, whatever. And so yeah, so you got animals. Animals move. Nature's fundamentally into perennials, not annuals, and the soil is built with carbon decomposition, and is the production is sold to people who have a relationship with the land and the producer.
And you mentioned some of the either barriers to entry for younger farmers looking to get started and I guess barriers to exit for the older generation looking to get out. What would be your advice for someone looking to get started, maybe on a smaller scale? So let's say you have someone who's has a suburban backyard, maybe an eighth or a quarter of an acre. What's a smaller scale system that somebody can get started with to basically be the gateway to scaling up?
Yeah, so somebody that's got a quarter acre or something, a suburban backyard, couple things. Number one is feed yourself. This is not a commercial venture. You're feeding yourself. So what do you like to eat? If you like to eat tomatoes and you don't like salsify, well, don't grow salsify. Grow what you like. Don't make this difficult, and you can certainly start producing vegetables, and you can change your landscaping from just ornamental to actually production. I mean, it doesn't take any more land to grow an apple tree or a pear tree as it does a non-productive Bartlett pear that's just for ornament. And so think about growing an edible, what we call edible landscaping, and a hedge. You can have just a green hedge, or you can make a hedge out of raspberries and thornless blackberries. Now you can get blackberries, you don't even have thorns on them. I mean, that makes a wonderful hedge if you want a bit of privacy or hedge of protection. So, yeah, these are things that you can do. And then, of course, I'm a huge fan of chickens, backyard chickens. There's nothing more utilitarian than a chicken. They can eat all your kitchen scraps. They lay eggs for you. They're the ultimate recycler. They're not loud if you don't have a rooster, and they're small. They're not going to, hurt your children. They're very child friendly, and so if you have a very small yard like that, I certainly encourage a stationary coop with a deep bedding. The problem that people get into with backyard chickens is they get smelly, they get stinky because they're on dirt or they don't have enough bedding. So what you want, nature sanitizes two ways, either with rest and sunshine, which is the rotational pasture idea, rest and sunshine, or vibrant decomposition, like a compost pile. But a compost pile requires depth. You can't make a compost pile, 12 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches. You got to have it, like a yard by a yard by a yard to get enough core community temperature. And so if we're going to have a chicken coop, you don't want it on a wire floor or on a dirt yard. You want a carbonaceous diaper, at least 12 inches deep, preferably 18 inches, even 24 inches deep, that the chickens can scratch in, and it'll grow its own worms and sprouts and all sorts of things. And the neat thing about that is you will have a place of compost to put on your garden beds and your fruit trees and things like that. One of the biggest hurdle or weaknesses in a very, very small acres like a suburban backyard production system is, in fact, is a lady was I was talking to a lady yesterday. I have just a really small place. Where do I get compost? She had a suburban backyard. And so one of the neat things about the chickens in a stationary coop with a deep bedding, you're feeding all your kitchen scraps, lawn clippings, um, weeds, everything I mean, go to your neighbors, get their kitchen scraps too. You could easily have 25 to 30 chickens, and in a year, they're going to make a nice, goodness, a couple pickup loads worth of nice, beautiful compost. And so, one of the best reasons I think to have uh, chickens in a suburban backyard in a stationary coop with a deep bedding, a box of deep bedding, is to generate your own compost, so you have something there to grow your own plants. So that's where I start. Start with your vegetables, edible landscaping, and chickens for sure. Chickens and rabbits. Rabbits are the lot of people. One nice thing about rabbits is they're quiet. And rabbit manure is fantastic. It's known as a cold manure, so it doesn't burn things. It doesn't have so much high nitrogen that it burns things. Chicken manure is really hot, so that's why it really needs to be composted. Rabbit manure is about the only manure, except for maybe horse, that I know of that can be used directly onto vegetables, especially nitrogen-loving vegetables like Swiss chard, green leafy things,
Sure.
uh, that doesn't have to be composted because it's so cold and gentle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if let's say under that system, if 10 million families adopted this and started this up in their backyard, whether they have a little bit of space and they're in a more rural area or they're in the suburban backyard that we talked about, what are some of the domino effects of even that small percentage of people getting started with this on the greater economy and the food system?
Yeah, well, it is a domino effect. I mean, when Pat Foreman wrote City Chicks several years ago, she computed that if 1 in 3 American families, if 1 in 3 had enough chickens to eat their kitchen scraps, there would not be a commercial egg industry in the U.S. Think about that a minute. Um, and where she tells a story of a city. I don't remember what that she names it in the book. I can't remember the name of it. It was in Belgium, and the city decided they'd have an initiative to reduce landfill stuff. It said, we'll offer three laying hens to any family that wants it. Well, they had 2,000 families raise their hands. Yeah, I'll take 3 chickens. So the city bought 6,000 laying hens, distributed them to these 2,000 families, and in the very first month, they dropped their landfill tonnage by 100 tons in the first month. And so when you think about the ultimate recycler, yeah, these things have huge effects. The domino effect across the food chain. I mean, think about it. In 1945, during the Victory Gardens of the World War II, um, the average food mile in America, the average miles that food went from field to fork was 40 miles. That was the average. Today it's 1,500 miles. And something like 50% of all vegetables were grown in backyard gardens at that time. And so, so the domino effect, when you start looking at, I mean, let's just go ahead and dive into the whole, Maha movement and the ultra processed food. Think think about a nation who in 1943 and 44, 50% of the vegetables were produced in backyard gardens. Today, 75%. Now I know I'm mixing a little bit of apples and oranges, but just stay with me. Today, 75% of all the food Americans eat is ultra processed, which by definition means you can't make it in your kitchen and you can't, you have to be a chemist to understand the label. And, and, um, and then we wonder why we lead the world in chronic morbidity. There are places where you want to be number one in the world. You want the number one gymnast, Simone Biles. You want the number one basketball team. You want the number one, track star, whatever. Swimmer. Okay. There are places we want to be number one, but there are places where you don't want to be number one. And right now, the U.S. is number one in uh, in non-infectious morbidity. So that's cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, um, all these things. These are primarily lifestyle and dietary issues. Diet is part of lifestyle um, issues, and so yeah, the domino effect in not only the food system but then health, all those things. It completely inverts all the dysfunctionality of our system if we of our culture if we move to a more um, a more unprocessed um, domestic culinary arts situation. So when people say, well, what's the first thing to do? The first thing to do is get in your kitchen. That's the first thing to do. And it's never been easier to get in your kitchen. I mean, when I say get in your kitchen, it's not some, 1880s sexist statement about, being in the kitchen. It's now we have ice cream makers, bread makers, Instapots, crock pots, time bake, hot and cold running water, refrigerators, freezers, blenders, ice slicers, dicers, everything you can imagine. We've got every gadget you can imagine. It's never been easier to cook from scratch, and no culture has ever abdicated that participatory, visceral connection like ours has, but it's never been easier.
So what do you think with those percentages being so much different from, I think you said, was it 1945 or the
Uh-huh.
statistic that you gave between then and now? Why is that? Or is it just a generational, one generation didn't pass it to the next? I guess who do I blame here, Joel?
Well, we have to blame ourselves. Now, there are plenty of people that want to blame, the big food companies or whatever. But ultimately, as a culture, we opted for TV dinner so we could watch, Happy Days on TV instead of cooking dinner. Convenience, convenience is the bane of authenticity. How many things are done for convenience sake? I mean, we can look at that in business ethics or whatever. Cheating it's all about trying to get something for nothing. And so as a one of the problems in America, unlike other countries, is that we have never developed a food culture. When you travel the world, you can go to any nook and cranny in the world, and there's some special food. There's something that they're known for, and and they take great pride in that. Hey, we're known for for this, but America has never developed a food culture that just relishes food for the sake of food. Um, Basically, our DNA is Yankee ingenuity, get her done, business, uh, innovation, technology, and so we lead the world in this kind of busyness, the busyness of business, and view food. And I'm painting with a broad brush here, but I think I'm pretty accurate. And as a culture, we view food as simply um, a pit stop, a not unnecessary, but an inconvenient pit stop that we have to do between the things that are important in life. Other cultures don't view food that way. They see meal times, they use words like a repast. It's a I mean, you go to Spain, I mean, they spend 2 hours sitting around the table, and we Americans, we're sitting there 20 minutes in, we've gobbled up our food, and we're what's the deal here? And these guys are just enjoying it, and nobody's in a hurry to get up and go.
We're
And
checking our emails while we're eating.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so I think the why is that we never developed a food culture as a culture. It was something that was just had to be done. And number two, we we have a love affair with convenience, and you add those two things up, and they're pretty devastating.
Mm.
And that's where our movement has come from. I mean, you know, squeezable Velveeta cheese, and hot pockets. And this stuff is not cheap. I was just I was noticing the other day that Lunchables are $14 a pound. I mean, that's that's way more expensive than our world class grass finished ground beef. Um, and so this stuff is not cheap, and people need to understand that convenience comes with a price. One of the things that I've seen people do, for example, is go and buy the ingredients of a, I don't know, a DiGiorno's frozen pizza, or some ultra processed food, and add up the ingredient cost that it would take to make this. What's the price of the finished product in the store, and what's the cost of here? And it's 30%. I mean, it's huge. The differences are huge. All that processing is not cheap. Uber Eats, DoorDash, 25% of meals are now, home delivered. DoorDash, Uber Eats. That's it's expensive. And um and so and soft drinks. My goodness. SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, food stamps, $15 billion with a B, $15 billion a year in SNAP goes to soft drink companies. Well, not only is that not nutritional, it's actually, health devastating. But there's no reason for us to be putting that kind of money on those kind of things. There's no reason for it.
Yeah. And Joel, to kind of turn the conversation here, what are some of your thoughts on, I know you mentioned you're not using any chemical fertilizers in your ventures. What are some of your thoughts as you hear a lot on the news lately that chemical companies are applying for immunity from charges for the health damage that chemicals that are being sprayed over crops are giving to families and individuals?
Yeah, well, it's going down the same road that vaccines went down. And we've seen the devastating effect of vaccine immunity. I mean, that's when the top blew off of the vaccine industry, and they went from whatever it was when I was a kid, 3 or something, to now whatever it is, 90. It's just ridiculous. And yeah, in the short answer is I'm not a fan. I think that kind of immunity from liability will, I mean, it's obviously is being precipitated by Bayer Corporation, which owns Monsanto,
Mhm.
and um, the glyphosate settlements that have now, I think they're about $7 billion now. So they're trying to protect themselves. But what's interesting is that the phrase that's important to understand in this immunity battle, immunity from liability for chemical companies, is as long as the chemical adheres to EPA standards. In other words, if EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, if the EPA says this is okay, use this way, that's where the immunity kicks in. So you get this real unholy alliance, as RFK Jr. talks about agency capture. You get very cursory scientific looking at these things. I mean, take glyphosate. It's been around a long, 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 long time. And I mean, decades. And when it first came out, it wasn't used that much because it would kill everything. Well, when genetically modified organisms, genetic engineering came along to make Roundup ready soybeans and other things, where the broadleaf plants did not succumb to the herbicide, the crop plants were immune to the herbicide. That's when the volume went up. I mean, you can look at the poundage. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's millions and millions of pounds just um, accelerated there once genetically engineered crops were developed. So here we are with the defense throughout the defense of these litigation cases. Well, the EPA said we could do it. The EPA said we could do it. The EPA said we could do it. And so the default position is always back on the EPA. Well, the thing is now, I mean, almost every day it seems like there's a new study coming out showing the deleterious effects of Roundup, of glyphosate. I mean, 80% of Americans now have it in our urine. All right. The thing is, this the ubiquitous and and extended consequential effects of glyphosate they could not have been known back in the early days because it simply was not that much in use.
Hmm.
So this is the issue of science. Science is incremental. You think you know something, and then 2 years down the road, oh, I didn't think of that, and now I know more. And then 2 years down the road, oh, I didn't think of that either, and now I know that. And this is the way science unfolds. You especially with new things like this. And so we have the same thing with things like glyphosate. And so for the industry to ask for EPA to freeze, another thing that's going on with this is to eliminate funding for the government agencies to run additional tests on these things. In other words, if you're in today, that's it. That's a stamp in perpetuity. It's okay, regardless of how many people get cancer, regardless of what we learn later, regardless of unintended consequences. You're approved, and that is not only is it unscientific, it's not even reasonable to expect that everything that we're going to know about something we know the day it launches. We never know that. I mean, you don't even know, you don't really even know your spouse when you get married. Everything is subject to additional learning.
Yeah, and a lot of that I feel like regulatory agencies and we'll just say government as a whole, it ends up being one of the major barriers to entry for a lot of people, or at least a fear factor in getting started because it doesn't necessarily work for us or in our favor in most cases.
Yes. Well, that's exactly right. And you have to laugh to keep from crying on this whole indemnity from liability, because one of the biggest arguments that people use against me, for example, for wanting food freedom and wanting to allow farmers to sell to their neighbors without getting the government permission is, well, who's going to protect the farmer from a liability suit? Maybe the farmer gets some bad food and his neighbor sues him. Who's going to protect the farmer? And and goodness, if we're going to create liability indemnity for chemical companies, then how about creating liability indemnity for direct market farmers who sell to their neighbors, and let's protect them from liability. I mean, good grief, it's a pot calling the kettle black, for these folks to say, well, we can't allow food freedom between neighbors because we've got to protect the farmers from liability immunity. Oh, here, let's vote to give liability immunity to the chemical companies over here. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. And it's, I would say, arguably smaller stakes when we're talking food poisoning versus cancer.
Yes, yes.
So one thing I've noticed is that I've seen a couple interviews with your son Daniel, and your family's very involved on Polyface Farm, and you've kind of created a family culture there that I think a lot of people would love to have. What's your recommendation or what's your secret for getting the family involved and continuing that legacy without, at an early age, I guess, creating a resentment for the level of work that can be involved?
Well, a couple things. It's a great question. It's a perceptive question. I mean, I think number one is to always present what you're doing as being noble and important and sacred. So often we sell our work short. Oh, I'm just trying to earn a living. I'm just trying to make some money. I'm just trying, and we have this extremely ignoble perception of our work, almost like I got to go to work, and so
Yeah.
kids grow up in this work is a demeaning thing. Work is uh, is is what we have to do so we can go play, as opposed to work being um, sacred legacy of creating a better world, serving our neighbors, building something that makes life better. And I mean, around here, that makes happier earthworms. I mean, we literally talk about how do we make earthworms dance, and and I mean that attracts the imagination of a child. A child can get excited about, hey man, we're going to make earthworms dance, and so this is the way we talk about what we do, about mission, about ministry. We're not just growing T-bone steaks and eggs and pork chops. Uh, we're we're um, we're we're arms and feet that are massaging and caretaking God's physical representation of Himself to us, and He could God could take care of His stuff. I mean, it's all His, not mine. And He could take care of it with angels. He could take care of it with cherubims. He could take care of it with the sound of His voice. But God's chosen me. He's chosen us to be hands and feet, to caretake, massage, to steward, His object lesson of provision for us, for humankind. And so we talk like that here. We use that kind of terminology to impress on the next generation. This isn't just so we can earn enough money to go to Disney World.
Yeah.
In fact, we don't go to Disney World. But I don't think it's sinful to go to Disney World. I have no desire to go there. Um, but the point is that you start with elevated ministry type language around your vocation.
Hmm.
That's where you start. Now, as you come, then the next thing is that you incorporate the kids into what you're doing. You don't push them aside, and you incorporate them into what you're doing. Obviously, at appropriate ages and appropriate things. But I mean, goodness, a 3-year-old can gather eggs. There's
Yeah.
nothing about gathering eggs that a 3-year-old can't do. And so one of the ways that you generate self-worth in my view, is by by successfully accomplishing meaningful tasks. One of the reasons we have such a terrible self-image problem in our teenage and young adult population, I think, is because too many young people are growing up not having successfully accomplished meaningful tasks. They know what meaningful tasks are. Being top points getter on Angry Birds or whatever the latest, video game of the day. I'm dating myself. I know I've never played a video game, so I don't even know what they are. But being the top points getter on a video game is not a meaningful task. I mean, it's a task, but it's not very meaningful. And kids know what's meaningful, what's not meaningful. And so, I mean, many times we run our households. We run our households as if the children are a liability and not an asset. In fact, we've got printouts from colleges saying here's how much your kid will cost you. And so parents look at that, or prospective parents, oh no, let's not have any kids because look how much they're going to cost. And we don't even design our households so with chores and canning and food prep and the different things that revolve around the household to to create opportunities for kids to be an asset to the adult world instead of a liability to the adult world. And so we want to incorporate them into all facets of our life as just part of this is how we live, this is what we do. And and life isn't just play and there's plenty of time to play, but we have to accomplish things. And then the third thing I would suggest is entrepreneurial options. And by that I mean between about 8 and 11, the average child will develop to a place where they know what money is. Until they're 7 or 8, sometimes a child would rather have um, a quarter than a dollar bill because a quarter is heavy, it's shiny, it's metal. But by the time they hit about 8, they know I think I'd rather have the dollar than the quarter. And so they've got to have a little bit of understanding of money. But until 11 or so, they're not they're still kids in that they're innocent. They have an innocence about their standing with other people. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't care what other people think about them, but it does mean that they are not as susceptible to, I think, to peer dependency and to um, I mean, I'll give you an example. So my granddaughter, she's now almost out of high school, but years ago when she was about 5 or 6, we were having a chicken pickup day. So she knew there were going to be a bunch of customers in the sales building. So she goes out in the field and goes around the pond and around the field. She picks this bouquet of wildflowers, and she comes in, and by the time customers were there, it was full of people. Or And so she's looking around, she's looking up, and she finds her victim, this nice, handsome guy standing there. She walks up to him, and she says, I'm Lauren. I picked these flowers, and I'm selling them for $1, and I'm sure your wife would love a bouquet of flowers." And what was hilarious was she didn't even wait for an answer. She already had Plan B ready. But if you don't have a wife, I'm sure you know a lady who would like flowers. She was not going to take no for an answer. What I'm getting at, Cameron, is that she would not do that at 12 years old. At 12 years old, that would, oh, I'm embarrassed. But at
Yeah.
5 or 6, hey, I don't have any qualms about running up to somebody and developing this. So both of our kids and our grandkids all had their entrepreneurial things, and that they started around 8 years old. Rabbits, pound cake, ducks, eggs, uh, lambs, different things that they did as their businesses. And so that was something that they could own themselves. And when somebody came and wanted to know about the lambs, well, those aren't mine. That's my grandson Andrew's. Go find Andrew and have him go show you his lambs. And so this personal ownership in entrepreneurial opportunities, I think, is a huge thing. I think parents really suddenly those years, that 8 to 11, that's only 3 years, and those just go by in a flash. And suddenly they're 13, and now they're all interested in how they comb their hair and what kind of clothes they got on and what kind of music they're listening to. And they're all into, of course, today it's all screen time and TikTok and all that stuff. But if you can catch them before all that kicks in, they will establish an identity in their own business opportunity, and that's a huge deal to have their autonomy. So
Yeah.
nobility of vocation, make your language around your vocation sacred and respectful. Incorporate them into just your regular daily living, all the projects, different things that you do, and then cultivating an entrepreneurial spirit in them. I think those are three areas that can help your kids, as I say, to work with your kids so they want to work with you.
Yeah, yeah. And that's one thing I've been really proud of with we have four sons. The younger two are a little young to be super entrepreneurial yet, but they'll get there. But the older two, from they're 12 and 14 now. From probably 5 or 6 years old, they've had very entrepreneurial spirits and had egg
Uh-huh.
ventures, sold flowers, things like that, which is something that I'm super proud of and grateful for. The downside of it is I can hardly get him to feed the dog without handing me a W-4, but we're we're getting there. We're getting there. But
Well,
no, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah. So on that, Cameron, we have always made a big distinction between chores and everything else. So there are things that you have to do as part of being human that redounds to the human family. In other words, nobody gets paid for cleaning the toilet. Nobody gets paid for washing clothes. Nobody gets paid for hanging up your clothes, making your bed, feeding the dog. Those kind of things are chores that just redound to the functionality of the home. And if nobody does them, it's pretty dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Those don't get paid. Those are what you do as an obligatory responsibility toward your humanity. But if you're out here doing something that redounds to the income of the family, to the income of you, and is not part of that, then that deserves compensation. And I don't have any problem with somebody wanting compensation. And sometimes you can turn things into businesses. Like, I mean, my favorite is gathering eggs. All right, you got a 5 or 6 year old, and you want them to gather eggs, and so you turn the eggs into a chore. Well, instead, flip that, turn it into a business. I'll tell you what, I'll pay you $8 a dozen for the eggs. We'll turn this into a business, and you buy the feed, you own the chickens, you make the decisions, and we'll buy eggs from you for $8 a dozen. Uh, uh, don't buy them for $2 a dozen. No, no, no. Market. We're going to respect. We're going to respect what this value is, and if it bites a little bit, paying the kids true market value for stuff, that's okay. The kids are going to grow up knowing, mom and dad honor me, respect me for what I'm bringing to the table, and they're and turning that from a chore into an entrepreneurial opportunity can completely change the way the child perceives it.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Joel. Well, hey, I know we're getting pretty close on time here. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been such a huge inspiration for operations on our own homestead, and I'm super grateful to you.
Oh, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to be with you, and look forward to our paths crossing next time.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Joel.
Yep. Thank you.